The sound you hear right now is audio from my dash cam. It was recorded 90 kilometres north of Brisbane as we were coming on this super highway, 3 lanes, and every car's doing 110 kilometres or more, and we had just broken down. I first noticed a shudder in my steering, and as soon as I focused on it, there was an explosion. My rear tyre had gone. 100 metres ahead of me was an off-ramp to a small town. If I could just get there, I would be absolutely fine. The problem is, suddenly, all these red lights came up on my dash and my engine was out. I knew straight away. I had a strong suspicion what had just happened. My wife at this point was utterly petrified. The weight of my very heavy vehicle, loaded up with 3 years worth of supplies for us to travel Australia, was suddenly going to work in my favour. The momentum would push me to that off-ramp, and I almost got my car clear. However, the rear tyre that had blown was still exposed a little bit to the outer left lane of that superhighway. I was in a dangerous position. My wife looked at me in terror and I said to her, "Give me your chewing gum." She was confused, but she spat it out and handed it to me, and I raced out to my vehicle, looked behind that blown tyre at the back of the driver's side and saw diesel pouring out everywhere, and I plugged the small hole there. What had happened was, as my tyre exploded, it had somehow picked up the fuel line and tore it clear off the tank. That's why my car wouldn't keep running. After I fixed the problem and put the new tyre on, I sat in the car. My wife, still looking terrified and shaking, wanted to know what had just happened, and I explained it to her exactly the way I explained it to you. However, my wife, like many women, not all, but like many women, my wife doesn't have the faintest idea how a car works, what it needs and how it operates. So although I explained it to her in layman's terms, exactly the way I explained it to you, this is what she heard. Kylie, during a routine vehicular locomotion event, an abrupt unscheduled pneumatic integrity failure occurred when the posterior road contact component suddenly failed. This sudden loss of structural cohesion in the elastomeric circumferential component initiated an escalating mechanical anomaly. As the detreading process ensured, the liberated rubber remnants engaged in an unplanned interface with the hydrocarbon conveyancing conduit. This interaction resulted in a complete detachment of said conduit from its intended attachment point on the fuel reservoir. Consequently, a gravitationally induced hydrocarbon infusion event transpired, disposing diesel across the thoroughfare and accumulating in the vehicle's operational succession at the side of the road. My name is George, and I've been a Land Rover man since the early days of joining the Australian Defence Force back in 1988. From those first days, well before mobile phones, GPS units and affordable satellite communication, I was already planning an Australia-wide adventure with my wife. The problem is, it was 1988. I hadn't worked enough to achieve such a dream. My Land Rover wouldn't even be produced until the next decade, and my wife, who I hadn't met yet, was a 14-year-old Sydney teenager wagging school, hanging out with her friends who thought that people over 20 were old. Now, here we both are, in our 50s and feeling like we're still in our 20s. We're fit, healthy, happily retired or choosing to work when we want to, as our kids are now all grown up and they've started their own lives. We're now empty nesters. And by the time the incident at the start of my story happened, we were in our 3rd year of going around Australia. You're listening to the Land Rover Diaries, brought to you by the Defenders of Australia Club in collaboration with Liz and Bill Martin, the wonderful couple stepping in to edit and produce this feature together with me, the Defenders of Australia Club Secretary, George Kalakis, that's me. And I'll be narrating this little podcast that will slowly tell my story about our adventures around this great country in a legendary car we've come to love and call the Busted Ass Land Rover. Let me first start with Liz Martin. I met Liz in Gundagai together with her husband Bill, and they urged me to sit down and write and share some of our adventures with our club members. And they worked hard to rewrite my jumbled up thoughts into an easy to follow story format, and for that I am so grateful. So, if you're at home, make a coffee or open a beer. Sit back with your feet up and come on a journey with me. If you're driving, turn that radio up and settle in for a few laughs and listen to some great tales that'll make your drive all the more fun. Welcome to the Land Rover Diaries. Like all stories, we need to go back to the start, and it was 2022. It seems so long ago when I rolled out this old map of Australia that I had pinched from the army decades ago, and I called Kylie over to the kitchen table. So babe, we're here, I said as I pointed to Townsville, Queensland on this huge laminated map that completely covered our large kitchen table. The map was covered in stains from decades of being left open and moved around the base. It had air bubbles trapped underneath the rows and rows of clear contact film placed on it by some poor private ordered to do so, perhaps back in World War II. Let's plan a trip around the country so we can see all the places that you've ever wanted to see, and I'll mark them here with my highlighter, I said to Kylie, with the confidence of a used car salesman ready to rip off a female customer. Kylie looked and said, well, I've always wanted to see Fraser Island. I reached over and popped a circle around K'gari, even though on my dated map it was called the Fraser Island Penal Colony. She then added, I'd also like to see Uluru. I moved over to the middle of the map and circled Ayers Rock, as it was called on this very old map. And I've always wanted to see Tasmania, she said, as she now sat and studied the map, trying hard to recognise names that she was reading. I moved over to the most south part of the map and circled it. Why is it called Van Diemen's Land, she asked. This is clearly a much older map than I thought. I knew I should have taken the more modern map from work that was much smaller, dated 1958. However, I had taken this old relic of a map that was dated using Roman numerals, but mistook for some kind of top secret document. So, babe, how long would you like to go away for on our travels to see all these places, I asked. She thought, about a month, say 3 weeks. Clearly my wife, who had never seen any part of Australia outside Sydney and Townsville by plane, may I add, had no idea the distances before us. Every day we'd look at the map and go gangbusters. We'd marked lots of places, towns, mountains, rivers and beaches that were in every corner of the map. We even marked where the border of Western Australia was, as this map seemed to predate the formation of that state. We decided to leave for a whole year. We joined a website called Aussie House Sitters. Being in our early 50s with no pets and kids in tow, we managed to book house sit after house sit with no issue. Some stays were 5 days long, others were as long as 12 weeks. In fact, one chap read our profile and offered his home with no pets, mind you, for 2 years while he went to the UK for work. And in return for us keeping his house lived in, he would cover all the power and all the bills and all the utilities that came with it. But 2 years was way too long to be stuck in one city when we were, after all, trying to see Australia. And besides, there was no Perth marked on my really old map. One morning in April, we climbed into our Land Rover Defender at 5 a.m. and our plan was to head inland and simply keep driving. I still recall trying to be quiet as we climbed into our old busted ass Land Rover while Kylie packed the last of our things in a bag and joined me. We took one last look at our empty house from the driveway, not knowing the exact date of our return, only that it would be sometime after 12 months. We were excited and nervous, and a feeling of apprehension consumed us both. While writing this part of the Land Rover Diaries, I asked Kylie if she could recollect how she felt that first morning as we prepared to leave, and she added, I just felt afraid. We were both afraid. We were afraid of the unknown. This is the part of our life that so many people look forward to. The part where you're free, where you can come and go, where you can do as you please. You're financially secure and retired. The hard yards are behind you and it's a whole new chapter now, but it's an unknown. We feared the unknown. We sat there silent that morning, and although it was only a few moments, it felt like hours to us as we said a silent goodbye to so much more than just our home and our town. It was a goodbye to our old way of life and to the old routine, to the normal that was normal for us for so long. With a deep breath and a sigh, I turned the key and started the car and turned the driving lights on. Suddenly, the quiet dawn was broken with the sound of a song that started playing from the car stereo. Una Paloma Blanca blasted out of our car speakers as I panicked and tried to find the volume of the stereo to turn it down. You see, for years, my old Land Rover had an old AM/FM radio in it. But days before our grand departure, one of my good friends gave me a CD player that he'd removed from his mother's car. What I didn't know was a CD was not only inserted into it, but the damn eject button to remove the disc was damaged, hence the upgrade to his mother's car. So now this CD player was installed in my car, complete with a jam disc called the George Baker Collection. "What's this music?" Kylie asked me as I found the volume buttons and frantically tried to press them up and down and sideways or whatever to turn the damn thing down. "It's our new sound system, my love. Now we can drive and enjoy tunes like this," I said to her confidently. That couldn't be further from the truth, I would soon discover. By the time we could see the sun, we had reached the coastal town of Ayr. The Land Rover was humming along at 85 kilometres an hour without a worry in the world. Kylie and I knew we were headed to colder regions of the country and we didn't have any warm clothing, but we did have a plan. By the time we hit Bowen, we stopped to make some lunch and have a coffee when we noticed an op shop. We all know what an op shop is in Australia, but for those following the story that might be from overseas, let me explain. Op shops, or opportunity shops, is second-hand stuff people didn't want and donated to one of the community shops that then clean the items up and sell them for a bargain price to those who don't wish to pay top price for something new or are happy to buy second-hand and practice the whole recycling mindset for sustainability purposes. For us, we simply didn't want to pay a lot of money. We found some warmer clothing and parted with less than $10. We then walked back to the car and climbed in and smiled at each other, feeling we'd actually made money by the savings we had just got. I turned the key of the old Land Rover and looked over my shoulder to back out, thinking it doesn't get any better than this, when suddenly the CD player defaulted on ignition to start disc and that first track kicked in, Una Paloma Blanca. "Leave it on, I like it," Kylie said. Yeah, she likes it now. But we had no idea that every morning for the next 3 years, we'd be welcomed by this brain-melting song every time we started our car. You've been listening to Chapter 1 of the Land Rover Defender Diaries, brought to you by the Defenders of Australia Club. Stay tuned for Chapter 2 coming your way very shortly, where we enter the world of full-time living on the road, house sitting and living around Australia for free, complete with all the do's and don'ts that we've come to learn in our 3 years of full-time travel. Feel free to send any questions that you might have about our adventures, and I'll endeavour to read them out live on the podcast and answer them to the best of my capability. Have a terrific day, Defender fans. Bye for now.